Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first webinar with AE911Truth. This is Richard Gage broadcasting from Berkeley, California, the site of our international headquarters of our humble operation. I am just delighted to be here to present to you wherever you are, on your mobile phone, on your computers, at home, at work. We're hoping to reach hundreds and hundreds of people as we continue the effort to awaken the American people and people all around the world, because this is an international broadcast. I am the founder of Architects and Engineers for 911Truth, a nonprofit organization of now 2,500 almost architects and engineers demanding a new investigation, signed on to our petition calling for that of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And that is very necessary, as you'll see from today's broadcast. Now, Architects and Engineers for 911Truth has been in operation for almost 10 years. When I first learned about the truth of what really happened on 9/11. I was in my van and on my way back from a construction site observation, and I was really quite shocked to be hearing this information from David Ray Griffin, who was being interviewed that day by Bonnie Faulkner of KPFA's Guns and Butter, a Berkeley free speech type radio program. I was a Reagan Republican. Don't ask me what I was doing listening to this quote communist station, which is how but they had a lot of interesting information, and this was no exception, of course. David Ray Griffin was reviewing the evidence that we're going to be reviewing in much more detail now in this series of 4 webinars. And I was so moved by this information, I just had to pull my car over into the parking lot, and I'm going, what am I hearing? And so I stayed there 40 more minutes listening to this incredible broadcast. And I went to that night, or I think it was the next night, to the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, and there were 600 people packed into that theater. They wouldn't even let me into the actual presentation itself, but I could get a couple of DVDs. I could talk to people. I could say, is this real? Sure enough, I checked out the information. I talked to people in the office I worked for. We had 15 architects there. A couple of months later, I had a presentation put together inspired by Stephen Jones, one of the early researchers who will be featured in our week 3 and 4 of this webinar. Stephen had quite a series of interesting PowerPoint slides. I added to it after doing some research, and I went to the firm I worked for in Walnut Creek there, and because I had been talking to these guys, and most all of them thought I was just nuts. What are you talking about? We would have heard about this by now if this were something other than what we've been told. So I certainly caught their attention early on, but I bought them pizza, made them come into the conference room, and I made them watch, all of them, this presentation over 45-minute lunch. And guess what? All of them, without exception, agreed with me. Oh my God, you're right. These are controlled demolitions. All 3 of them. And we're going to be talking about the 3rd high-rise today that came down. Most architects and engineers know nothing about it. And I didn't know anything about it before then. So that's the subject of today's seminar. And before we get to it, all 14 of the 15 signed the petition on that day. Then we had 15, including myself, architects and engineers for 9/11Truth. My boss was Middle Eastern. He decided to not sign the petition. There was a climate of fear at that time. But I want to introduce to you today Mr. Andy Steele, who is our operations manager at AE911Truth. He'll be helping me in the background here and with the Q&A. Andy, would you say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
There's Andy. And what are you excited about with this webinar series, Andy?
I'm excited for the opportunity to reach a whole new audience of people that may not be able to come out to your presentations, but can watch you via the magic of the internet and get this important information, and then invite others next week to come and hear the continuation.
Pretty awesome. And do you have anything else we want to add before we get right into our business today?
During the presentation, you may have questions about the information that you are receiving, so feel free to send questions. Try to keep them within, 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 sentences if you can. That way we can read it quickly and get the information to Richard quickly to be able to answer during the Q&A session.
And also, let's keep them on topic. The architects and engineers for 911 Truth, as you'll see, focus on the science of what happened to the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11, and we don't know who's responsible for this. We don't research those areas. There are people who do, so we don't look into Shanksville. We've not focused on the Pentagon. So let's not go into detail on these other areas of which our expertise is quite limited. But we will focus on the towers, as you can see on your screen. This webinar is based on our presentation, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, which we have given now 550 times around the world in 38 foreign countries and 82 American cities to groups from 100 to 3,000 in Chicago. So we've been very blessed to get this information out, and yet, as you all know, the majority of Americans are still wanting for knowledge on this subject, and so we've got a lot of work to do. With that in mind, let's find out what we're going to be looking at today. We'll certainly be looking at this 3rd skyscraper, and we'll be using the scientific method with regard to it and looking at that very quickly. And the evidence of explosions and how normal office fires were said to have brought this building down to the ground. We'll be looking at very hot pyroclastic-like clouds of chemical reactions, foreknowledge of an advanced knowledge of this building coming down before it did. And we'll be looking at some expert opinions as well. Most people, as I mentioned, don't know anything about the 3rd skyscraper on 9/11, World Trade Center Building 7. And so just a quick note about my experience. I've worked on $120 million high school construction administration and construction documents for these $4 and $10 million gymnasiums. More recently, I've worked on in Las Vegas, Nevada, project with $400 million project, which is now constructed. It's got 1,200 tons of steel framing, fireproof steel framing, in this mid-rise office space, and 6 blocks of retail, as well as the parking structure associated with it. Now, we have a website, and some of you may not even be aware of it. For those of you who are, it's AE911Truth.org. And you can watch this broadcast right from our website if you type in /webinars after www.AE911Truth.org/webinars. So a lot of interesting information, follow-up videos and so forth, frequently asked questions, you can see on the website there. You can sign up for our monthly email newsletter right near where you're watching this, if you're watching this on our website, and you'll get a free PDF of the booklet, which is 50 pages long, and it's our response to the fraudulent NIST report about the destruction of all 3 skyscrapers. 50 pages, excellently written. Our latest effort to reach academics and others as well. It's more technical than our brochure, of course. When we look at 9/11, people say, why are we, this is 15 years old now, almost. The 15th anniversary is this September. Why are we even looking at it? Well, 9/11 caused, let's just remember, it was a horrible attack on Americans, which caused us to support our Congress and president into invading two countries in which over 1 million people have perished, including 7,000 U.S. soldiers and thousands of others, of course, mostly innocents. So if there's any question about 9/11, which sponsored a $4.5 trillion global war on terror, don't we think we need to answer every question that comes up? And yet, as we know, the 9/11 Commission didn't even broach the subject of the third skyscraper to collapse. It didn't broach the evidence of explosions and extreme heat, which we'll be looking at in a seminar series. We've lost our civil liberties with the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the 9/11, the 2012 executive order for the National Defense Authorization Act, in which any of us, you, me, can be arrested. We can be held indefinitely. We can not be, they don't even have to tell us what we're charged with. They can torture us. They can even assassinate American citizens. That is all quasi-legal now. And it's an abomination. Our forefathers would be turning over in our graves. So again, if there's any question about what happened on 9/11, don't we owe it to ourselves to stop and look squarely at the evidence, no matter where it leads? I think so, because look at everything else that happened since 9/11. Our torture policy, which has shredded our own reputation around the world, and a whole homeland security, which federalizes all of our legal law enforcement institutions and intelligence services. We have an emerging police state, massive injustice, as you know, in the Middle East, Syria and so forth, Libya, on and on and on. The draining of our treasury, of course, and we're all being spied on now. And everybody knows that but we live with it. We put up with it. But remember, it goes back to 9/11. So let's start looking at 9/11. And when we do, we use a scientific method. In our case, we have a specific question. How did the towers come down? Well, is it fire that brought them down, jet planes? Or is it controlled demolition? That's the question we're wrestling with tonight. So we formulate that question. It's our best guess, our hypothesis. We make some observations, do some background research. We construct that hypothesis and clarify it and make predictions around it. We test those predictions with experiments, and we analyze the results, draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner so all that follow us can build on the body of our evidence. That's how science works. It's open. We will be finding out how open the process that NIST used, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in their particular effort to what turns out to be a complete cover-up. But we'll come back to that. If the hypothesis is not corroborated, we go back and we draw a new best guess, a new hypothesis, and one that stands a better chance against the data, the experiments, the observations. So with that in mind, let's apply the scientific method and ask ourselves, what are the forces that destroy buildings? Well, certainly fire is one of those. The fire is an organic process. It works through an area like an office building in 20 minutes or so. That's all the fuel there is there. And it moves on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So if a building is going to collapse by fire, it's going to be an organic, asymmetrical collapse. The building will creak and groan as structural systems are failing one at a time. The building will fall over toward the path of least resistance, not straight down through 40,000 tons of structural steel in the case of this building. But what we note is that never in the history of skyscrapers do we have a global collapse of a skyscraper due to fire, even though we have several examples, like this one in Los Angeles, which burned 3.5 hours over 5 floors, of very hot, large, and long-lasting fires, like this one also in Philadelphia, burned 18 hours over 8 floors, and in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. Not one of them came down. Now, here's some buildings that did come down, not due to fire, but in this case, earthquakes. They follow the path of least resistance. They fall over. Their structure is certainly mangled, but recognizable as a building at the bottom of this pile. Sometimes it's pancaking collapses. The structural system is not dismembered from itself. Its concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. So let's keep this in mind. We're doing some background research. In this case, these buildings have been exploded. There are features of explosions, such as the sounds of explosions, where witnesses hear explosions. They see flashes of light. There are thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds from the intense chemical reactions produced from the explosives. There's a thick edge, a very clearly defined edge between these unfolding pyroclastic clouds and the surrounding air. It's acting like more of a solid, if you will, than like smoke from a normal fire. So let's keep that in mind. If you have these features, you know you have explosions. Now, explosions can be harnessed in with thousands of them very carefully placed in order to bring a building, like you see here, down into its own footprint, usually, because engineers place critically located cutter charges or explosive charges that are designed to specifically cut through the columns and beams in the building, enabling it to come down where they are completely separated from each other, one structural element from another. There are thousands, or at least hundreds, of cases where we can draw from to make our reference, because this is the most commonly used method of bringing down high-rises, of course. We've all seen them in the old hotels in Las Vegas. Well, there are features associated with this kind of destruction, controlled demolition, it's called. There's a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure, resulting in a straight-down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint, because demolition waves remove those column supports. And this often results in the free fall speed, because there is no more resistance from those columns. They've been removed. It goes through the path of what was the greatest resistance, resulting also in the total dismemberment of the steel structure for loading and shipment. That's very convenient. And this results, of course, in minimal damage to adjacent structures. That's one of the ideas here. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. And we have enormous clouds of pulverized concrete. That's what explosives do. They break up concrete. Easier to ship that way. You don't want guys going in there with jackhammers later on. And isolated explosives, often at different points and locations, different floors in the building, they're called squibs. They're very visible when you have these, you have explosives. And of course, we have chemical evidence of cutter charges or the explosives or incendiaries going, resulting in the basement and the debris at the bottom. This is all direct evidence of explosive destruction. And guess what? Fire cannot create any one of these features, let alone all of them. So we can see where we're heading here. Did these buildings come down by fire? Did they come down by explosives? We use the scientific method and see if these features are evident in the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers, especially if we have circumstantial or corroborating evidence like government documentation. That can be very helpful, and you'll see that we do with respect to the Twin Towers. Expert corroboration, at least those experts who don't have a bias, i.e. they're getting $100,000 contracts annually from the federal government, which might just make them wince a little bit about talking about the truth or the explosive evidence of about the of the three World Trade Center skyscrapers. But for those who might otherwise not be so biased, and we have some examples of that today to share with you, can be very helpful. Foreknowledge. We know that when a building's going to be pulled or demolished, explosively demolished, because you have to get permits, you have people who are planning these months in advance. It takes dozens of operators to bring down a high-rise and even to engineer and place these explosives. So that's helpful. And of course, the videos reveal proof of controlled demolition when we have it. It's not so hard to do. Let's begin. And let's begin with Building 7. At some point in your process, you may see a poll come up. Please, it's going to ask you about your familiarity with Building 7. If you didn't know about or much about Building 7 prior to this broadcast, please fill in that poll, and we will tally the results. It's a 47-story skyscraper, which is like, the tallest building in most of our states. Now, it wasn't hit by an airplane. That's why we're talking about it first. We can set the airplane and the jet fuel aside, focus on a building that came down in a very interesting manner on 9/11, 350 feet or so, a football field away from the North Tower. So let's take a look then at the building after the towers came down. It stood all day till about 5:20 in the afternoon when it collapsed. Small fires did appear, and we'll show you those. But the building standing here in pretty good shape after the Twin Towers had gone down that morning, 7 hours earlier. So what we're going to do is look at the features of this building's collapse and see if there's any comparison to that of a controlled demolition. Starting with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of this structure? Well, let's listen to this medical student, Daryl, who was watching the building and very close to it.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The top floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then
a shock wave ripping through the building, the windows busting out. A second later, the bottom floor caved out. This is exactly what controlled demolitions do, not fires. But let's listen to Dan Rather, who's actually narrating this, which for some of you may be your first view of this building collapsing on that day.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing and incredible picture work. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before. A building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Whoa, what did Dan say? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, that's great. Dan's using his intuition. We should all be using our intuition. We've seen this kind of thing on TV before from the old hotels in Las Vegas. Why isn't NIST looking at the striking similarity? We'll come up, but we'll discover that. What's interesting is that Dan never repeated this. In fact, we have never, with 2 or 3 exceptions, seen Building 7 coming down on mainstream media. This is not even discussed, which is why I and most architects didn't even know there was a third skyscraper that came down, straight down, symmetrically, into its own footprint, the second feature of controlled demolition. Take a look from West Street here. Is it coming down straight? Is it coming down symmetrically? Yeah, pretty symmetrically. In fact, look at the penthouse, which drops a half a second prior to the overall collapse of this building. That indicates that the core of this building collapsed a half a second prior. The core is what supports the penthouse, the screen wall, etc. up there. That means that the core was not destroyed 10 seconds or 20 seconds earlier, as NIST claims, and we'll get into their theory, but they say the inside caved out first, and that left the exterior shell. And this proves that that is a lie. But we go on and compare side by side building 7 on the left, a known controlled building demolition on the right, a series of them. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? And yet NIST never seriously considered the use of explosives in this building. In fact, they say they never even looked for evidence of explosives after claiming that they didn't find any. They answer a question later on in writing saying they never found any. They never looked for it. Well, they should have clearly looked for it, since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and since no fire has ever brought down a skyscraper in history. This should have been the first hypothesis that NIST looked at. So this is why we know that it's one of the dozens of reasons we know that we're looking at a cover-up here. And these are the fires, people, that are said to have brought this building down. These are the worst fires in this building. And you can see them burning here. Small scattered fires throughout this building. These fires were out over an hour before this building came down on the 12th and 13th floor, which is the initiation point of these fires. As you can see, at 2:30 p.m., these fires are burning. As you can also see, at the initiation of collapse, NIST will go into these fires and their analysis by NIST more when we look at the in-depth NIST report and our critique of it next week. Actually, that's coming up on Thursday per the schedule right there on our website. So how do we bring a building straight down, uniformly, symmetrically? Here's the columns in those buildings. They're fairly evenly spaced. You have to take out all those columns at once in order to bring this building down symmetrically. And that has to happen on each of at least 8 floors, and you'll see why in a minute. Synchronistically timed. If you get that timing wrong, guess what? You get buildings that fall over. And there are some horrible examples of controlled demolitions where the timing didn't go and they do fall over. This is a rather perfect example of a controlled demolition where they were able to precisely remove those columns. The question you have to ask yourself is, can fire do that? Obviously it can't. Fire moves through a building every 20 minutes or so from one side to the other. The building would have fallen over if this were the first building to collapse ever due to fire, first high-rise. How fast is the building coming down? Take a look at this. It's as if 8 stories were suddenly removed from the building, allowing the building to suddenly, as you saw, fall freely at free fall acceleration. In fact, that is going to be discussed in more detail next week as well. So you have to remove the resistance. The columns provide the resistance. And this results in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. Take a look. All of the columns and beams had to have been separated from each other in order for it to fall like a house of cards. The complete steel structural frame was dismembered. We have a 47-story moment-resisting steel frame building reduced to a house of cards. That can only happen if those columns and beams are removed, separated from each other. Remember, buildings that collapse due to natural causes, we see the mangled building at the bottom. It doesn't collapse like a house of cards. Do we have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions? Well, here's one. Kevin McPadden, former Air Force Special Operations. He was on site helping out. Here's his experience. Now, he, like others, were moved back 6 blocks from this building behind the I guess it was yellow tape. And he was listening to the radio held in the hand of a Red Cross worker. Here's what he heard.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Well, that's pretty clear. If I experienced that, I think I'd be experiencing explosions too.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you could just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing. When we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions. It also the sound. Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, the police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
How many of you think that NIST covered these credible witnesses and their experiences of explosions? Not one of them or any of the other hundreds of witnesses of explosions at the World Trade Center complex were included in any of the official 9/11 reports on these buildings collapses. Not one. It's absolutely incredible. And during the course of this webinar series, you're going to hear many, many more. So this is also evidence of a cover-up. A cover-up of explosions like this, which everybody heard downtown World Trade Center in the afternoon of 9/11.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
By the way, explosions like this are all on our incredible documentary that I think it's incredible. I mean, I think it's the best thing we've ever put out that goes through 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, firefighters, all laying out the evidence for what you're seeing here in this webinar series. It's called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. You can just Google Experts Speak Out. And this is on our store. I encourage you to look at some of the resources to inform yourself there at AE911Truth. Up at the top, what you can do is one of the menu items that allows you to browse through the store there. So next we have enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete. What are we talking about? Well, the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, in this guide 921, the Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations, the guide that NIST helped produce in the first place, but which was not followed by them, it in fact tells us to look for large volumes of gas and large amount of heat released in chemical explosions, rapidly expanding plumes of hot gases, i.e. pyroclastic-like flows. This is evidence of a very hot material. This is much more than normal office fires produce, as you'll see here, where we have racing away from Building 7 in every direction at 35 miles an hour, these hot plumes of gases, much hotter than a few small scattered fires in this building. Remember, there's no jet fuel in this building. People are running from these clouds for their lives. They're very, very hot. And there's multiple witnesses of these hot clouds. This is building 7, not the Twin Towers. Of course, the Twin Towers had a very, very similar situation. We'll get to them, of course, in week 3 and 4. Chemical evidence of cutter charges. Well, we're going to look at this very specifically when we get to week 4 of the Twin Towers, because it's a fascinating part of our series. And we're going to be just focusing today on the other features. These 8 features are direct evidence of explosive destruction. And remember, fire can't create any one of these, let alone all 8. Not these fires in World Trade Center 5, which are completely engulfing that building and responsible for most of the smoke that people confuse with the smoke coming from Building 7. Did it collapse? Nope. Building 5 remains standing. Fires don't bring high-rise buildings down due to the heat. It just doesn't happen. Not these steel frame buildings. And we'll look more about that next week too. Not in this 44-story high-rise hotel, the Mandarin Hotel in 2009, which is completely burning from top to bottom, fully engulfed in flames. If any high-rise was going to come down, we'd expect it to be this one. In fact, we've seen 3 or 4 high-rises in the last 5 years on fire. None of them came down. One was just a month ago or so. How about this building? What does it look like? Well, here's before on the left, after on the right. Slightly toasted around the edges, put back into use, just like all the other high-rises that have had fires. Yet these small scattered fires are said to have brought this massive building, each floor of which is the size of a football field, 47 stories, down to the ground in a pile about 6 stories high. Not going to happen. What does FEMA and NIST have to say about this? Let's just begin to take a look. We'll go into more depth next week. On Thursday. Well, FEMA cast doubt on their own theory. The specifics of the fire in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. What? You spent $600,000 and you have no idea how this building came down? I thought that was very clear. I thought everybody knew how this building came down. Nope. Our best hypothesis, fire plus random damage, and then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. Whoa! What do you do when your best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence? You go back and you find a new one. Construct a hypothesis that stands a better chance against the actual evidence. This is not what NIST did. They covered it up. In fact, their computer models will not be released. They refuse to release them, citing that it could jeopardize public safety. Wait a minute. Not releasing to the engineers and architects who design high-rises, who are insured with, who are tasked with ensuring the public safety. That in and of itself jeopardizes public safety, does it not? No. They say, FEMA, in this case, further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Well, we agree. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, 400 truckloads a day were carted away from the World Trade Center site starting 2 weeks, in the case of Building 7, after the collapse or the destruction is what we prefer to call it now. 2 weeks, not giving the engineers enough time to look at it, enough access to the site. The civil engineers were complaining bitterly about not being able to look at the steel. There's only like 256 pieces of steel saved, 2 of those from Building 7. And the excuse, well, nobody died at Building 7, so we just wanted to clean it up. Well, there are some witnesses that people did die, but irrespective, that steel could have been saved at Fresh Kills landfill for analysis of the largest and least understood structural failure in history. The illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene is what we're talking about here, people. This is incredible. Prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cite as crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing the astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it wasn't. And in fact, they were not listened to. The crime scene investigators, the fire investigators, explosion investigators, all ignored. What do the experts say? Again, those experts who aren't as biased, like this one, and Danny Jowenko, and the top European controlled demolition expert. 27 years in the business. It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. You see, he was shown this collapse on a laptop well after 9/11. They didn't tell him what it was. He's just responding to what he knows as an expert. Didn't know it was from 9/11 yet. He says, well, it's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Professional work, without any doubt. Well, then they tell him, well, this happened on 9/11. It's like the third tower that went down. He goes, no way. So you can see that video of him on our documentary, Experts Speak Out. 9/11 explosive evidence, experts speak out. He says they must have worked very fast. Well, that's true because, well, it's not true. He knows that it takes months to plan these, but he's just using his mind to try to figure out how such a thing could happen. Do we have foreknowledge of this building's destruction? Well, interestingly enough, listen to these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder to Building 7, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down.
Building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys.
We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. All flame and debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. How do they know? This is a building with a few small fires in it. They were told not, the firefighters told not to go into the building. They said it had some structural damage. Well, that's the story that went around. So they were told not to fight the fires. And yet, when we'll come to Mr. Larry Silverstein. Well, let me share with you now. He's on America Rebuilds, a PBS station, and he says, talking to the fire commander, and there's been such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they gave the order to pull, and we watched the building come down. Well, wait a minute. He says later, oh, I meant pull the firemen out of the building. I didn't mean pull the building itself. Well, the firemen, again, weren't in the building. They were told not to fight the fires in the building. And you wouldn't talk like that if you're talking about firemen. So there's a lot of confusion and misinformation and disinformation going on at the site here. But we can see what happened, as evidenced by, again, Kevin McPadden, who this time is talking about his experience of the countdown.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? No, doesn't happen. BBC also knew about this building's collapse before it happened. This is Jane Stanley. They apologized for this grievous error after they realized that they announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it happened. The unprecedented collapse of a 47-story skyscraper. So they apologized, saying that, oh, confusing. It's just too confusing. What are they, psychic or something? The word is getting out too early here. So this is what we need to watch for is things that just don't add up with World Trade Center destruction. Here also we have CNN announcing the collapse of this building very early that morning. Alan Dodds-Frank, let's listen.
In New York, Alan Dodds-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan.
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Saga and others have told you,
a 50-story building collapsed. There's no other 50-story building that collapsed. In fact, this was about 15 minutes or so after the second tower collapsed. Had this building come down at that time, we might not even know about it because it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud released from the Twin Towers when they went down earlier that morning. So this is why a lot of researchers suggest that and speculate that the building was supposed to come down. And this is yet another example of a pre-release of information designed to be consistent with a plan that that would have been much more convenient for the perpetrators of the destruction of the World Trade Center complex. And then that those mysterious construction workers were going back into the building, perhaps to fix that in the later morning and early afternoon, and then at 5:20 it finally went off, so that it was a dud at 10:45 or whatever. Anyway, that's speculation. What's not speculation is the rest of the evidence, which seems to corroborate the hypothesis of controlled demolition. It seems that we have shown you today 8 features of direct evidence of explosive destruction here. Again, fire not being able to accommodate or create any one of these. And with additional corroborative evidence, as we see in the green row here that we showed you, this is, we believe, proof of controlled demolition. Beyond a reasonable doubt, certainly. And we have 2,400, almost 2,500 architects and engineers calling for a new investigation based on this. So if you do see the poll that we have programmed to ask you if you believe that a new investigation of Building 7 is necessary, then I'm asking you to fill out that poll, or if it's not necessary, or if you just don't know still, that's fine. Let us know what your opinion is on this, because those who have looked at this say, well, who was in this building? Who had access? Well, this is a very highly secure building. The CIA, the Secret Service, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor, a hardened bunker which was capable of withstanding hurricanes and even nuclear war of some degree. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which actually had the worst fires on floors 12 and 13 on the backside of Building 7, opposite the North Tower. Interestingly enough, we certainly want an investigation of those fires. because they lost thousands of files related to hundreds of cases that they were pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. So, this is a fire that there's just not that much fuel in that building to be burning like that, and specifically on that floor. Anyway, who could have gained access? This is clearly an important question. And while architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth don't research, we're not criminal investigators. We don't have the capability, and it's beyond our scope and our skills. But there are those who have and who do. That's extremely important work. Enterprising journalists who want to get to the truth, not as we see in the mainstream media who cover this stuff up. By the way, it's interesting to note, people say, well, why didn't the media cover it? I said myself, why didn't I hear about this on CNN? Well, it turns out that groups like Project Censored, a think tank, media critic organization from Sonoma State, have found very clear interlocking board of directorates between the 6 corporations that are responsible for 90% of the American media. And they found that who controls those corporations, it turns out to be the same people who control the corporations in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all of whom profited enormously from 9/11. So we don't get into that, but it would be foolhardy for us not to be aware of that, because we are asked these questions all the time. And people need to go look at these sources where these answers can be found, such as Project Censored. Google that. Do you think Al-Qaeda had access to this 47-story skyscraper to plant and set these explosives and engineer them? Most likely not. And this is why you have people considering that this is some sort of an inside operation. Clearly it is. That's why they like to call us conspiracy theorists, and they have all kinds of names for us. But we're looking at the hard science here. And people who have looked at that have found serious questions, which is why we had a couple of years ago a massive billboard campaign, and we still have a billboard up outside the New York Times, challenging them to look at the actual evidence that they say there's no evidence for the explosive destruction here. And so we continue to do everything we can do. We come up with new ideas, and we want your ideas. What do you think will reach the sleeping American public? The eyes, the hands over the eyes, mainstream media, the government with their fingers in their ears, who will not listen, even though we've given our petition, our DVDs, every time we reach 1,000, 2,000, and again when we reach 3,000 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. We are demanding a new investigation. We want you to contact your elected representatives. We want you, along with us, to write to your local TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, letters to the editor. We want you to reach out to the national radio, newspaper, and magazines. We want you to email the AE911Truth.org link to everybody you know. We've got to do something. Get our email newsletter. And when you do that, you'll get the PDF of our new booklet. This booklet also includes, in a harder copy version, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. This is the book that has been issued now to 40,000 professionals in the architecture and engineering community, and going out more and more. You can also become a member of AE911 Truth. We're a nonprofit organization, and for as little as $2.50 a month on up, you can choose your level of membership. You can become one with us, because guess what? We can't do this alone. We're a half a dozen volunteers and some paid staff. We've got enormous work to do, and so we can't do it without your support. Please become a member. Support our volunteer staff, our paid part-time not professionals, but some of us are professionals. Some of us are working our buns off to break through into mainstream media, get the vinyl banners, the DVDs, the brochures to the people who are working so hard out there, and help our team, our presenter team, speak in every city around the country. You can volunteer. If you can't give financially to support us, you can certainly volunteer. We have needs in our website, especially if you know HTML. We have a graphics department that needs your help, video, fundraising, AE verifications, writing, congressional outreach, public outreach, translation team. We're in 22 languages now, but we're not reaching everybody. And we need people who know how to do research, who can do quick tasks, for instance, calling various architects and engineers and media. We have all kinds of assignments like that, and we need people to present this information all around the country. Whatever you do, follow your conscience and act, because 9/11 was a seminal event that changed, as we saw earlier, so many parts of our society and our world, and we can unchange it. We can unchange it by awareness. One of the key points of awareness that we provide is documentaries like this, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. The documentary trailer I'm going to play for you, it's a couple minutes long.
Conspiracy theories, there are lots of them. They can go on, we can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
Well, there it is. You can see the DVD yourself. The full 90-minute program is on our website and our store. You can reach that at the top of our website under what you can do. So you can see why we are so determined to get the truth out, because the truth is so very clear about the destruction of these towers. And next week we'll be, in addition to a review of some of today's evidence, we'll be looking into the American Society of Civil Engineers, FEMA, and NIST reports, their flaws, including the NIST computer simulation, which they say proves their theory, or they try to prove their theory, which of course it just does just the opposite. The analysis of the fires in these buildings, and we'll hear more from other structural engineers. At this point, I'd like to bring Andy on, our operations manager, and Andy's been receiving some of the questions. And let's see what we got here and see if we can answer some of your questions. Andy? Uh-oh. Okay, a first question here is, a friend of mine is a structural engineer. He said that World Trade Center 7 was a poorly designed building that lacked redundancy and ductility, and that is why it collapsed due to fires. Comment? Well, not even NIST says that any of these three skyscrapers were poorly designed. In fact, they praise the structural engineers of these buildings, saying that they did, particularly in the case of the Twin Towers, a fine job resisting the airplane impacts and the fires, allowing most of the occupants to get out. NIST does not fault the structural design of the towers, though others do. And we don't have a criticism of the Building 7, which was designed privately and by Larry Silverstein, built in the mid 80s, which complied with all the codes at that time. They had to go through the city's rigorous code check process. So I have never heard this particular comment about the faulty design for Building 7. It sounds like a very convenient way to dismiss the evidence. And so I encourage this particular structural engineer to actually look at our DVD and the broadcast of this webinar. By the way, you can see more clearly on your screen if you go to the settings in YouTube, right there on your screen, right below where you're watching, and click the gearbox and change the resolution to 420 or 720 dots per inch. You'll get much clearer resolution. You have to do that manually. We're doing everything we can to submit at the highest resolution, but people unfortunately have to actually manually change that setting. And so we'll get into the North Tower more. But another question here. Andy, are you back? Yeah, we can't hear Andy. Can you text Andy, Larry, and let him know that we can't hear him? I'm looking for another question here. And I don't see a question. So we need to connect with Andy in order for me to see the questions. Another question that comes up quite a bit, though, is, hey, I heard that that there were directed energy weapons used at the World Trade Center, and And we don't know what else might have been used at the World Trade Center. We do know. There's Andy. You back, Andy?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. So I'll let Richard finish that question, and then I'll give you the next one.
Sounds good. And so there's one particular person, Judy Wood, who has written a book called Where Did the Towers Go? And in it, around page 126 plus or minus, she actually denies the evidence of explosives going off. And you've heard some, and you'll hear a lot more, actually dozens and dozens coming up in weeks 3 and 4. She denies the evidence of hot and molten iron, which you'll also see abundant in sections 3 and 4. She denies the explosions, hot molten iron, and nanothermite, which is a very, very highly engineered incendiary, which we have abundant evidence for in all the World Trade Center dust, which you'll see again in week 4. While showing literally no evidence to support the actual use of directed energy weapons, I just have suspicions of somebody who denies the evidence for the most that we have the most basic scientific forensic proof of. That's my largest issue with her on that. Andy, you have another question?
Yes, I do. I have one that came in that said World Trade Center, and I'm assuming that they're talking about 7, though they didn't cite or state it. But World Trade Center 7 was not hit by a plane. It was hit by something a lot bigger, the North Tower. So what does NIST have to say about that? That's my addition to the question, and can you comment on that?
Well, there's no evidence that anyone has ever cited, and I've been at this 10 years, to suggest that the World Trade Center 7 was hit by anything other than a few beams that were ejected laterally from the Twin Towers, which is a fascinating phenomenon we'll also get to in week 3 of the webinar series. So not even NIST or Silverstein suggests that the Trade Center was hit by anything other than those beams.
Right, and I'll just add, too, that if you go to NIST FAQ number 21, they address that and how the structural damage did not initiate the collapse. Our next question is going to be, what is the fastest known time in which a building of World Trade Center 7 size could be set up for a demolition?
We're talking months to engineer and place these explosives. It does not happen in an afternoon. This has been suggested. And the other thing that's suggested is that, well, maybe these buildings, these tall towers were placed with explosives during their construction. Well, explosives and incendiaries don't last that long. It's a very ludicrous suggestion. Some people say they were placed there in order to bring them down safely in the event that they caught on fire or that they started to tip over. This is also ludicrous. There's not one structural engineer in the country that you can find to support that. And of course, what insurance agency would ever insure a building with explosives in it, and what occupants and tenants would consider using the building under such circumstances? It's just ludicrous. We just don't hear about these things other than about 9/11 and trying to rationalize why there may have been explosives, for which we do have abundant evidence, as you're beginning to see. Andy? Andy, I can't hear you. There you are. Okay, good.
Our next question is the New York Fire Department. Peter Hayden says an engineer told him World Trade Center 7 would collapse in 5 hours, and Hayden says 5 hours later 7 collapsed. Who was this engineer?
Yes, it was an anonymous engineer, and God only knows why nobody can figure out who this guy's name is, that did some surveys apparently and discovered that there was some deformation in the perimeter structure of Building 7, and actually gave saying that the building has, I think it was 5 hours And then indeed, 5 hours later, it came down after witnesses heard all these explosions. Back to you, Andy.
Next question. Why don't respected organizations like the American Society of Civil Engineers and Structural Engineers Association refuse to recognize and support AE911Truth?
We certainly have the same question. There is an extraordinary veil or shadow over the subject of 9/11 in general. And we were all put into a state of shock and awe on that day. It was very painful. We didn't know when the next attack was coming. Remember, we didn't have the information or misinformation that we have today. We were under attack for the first time in the mainland of our country from another country, the first significant time. And we're looking for answers. We're reduced in that state to an infantile state. We're operating from our reptilian brain. We need quick answers, and we need to put this pain and unknown, the state of shock, behind us, and we need to not go back there again. So while we are at conventions several times a year talking to architects and engineers, and when they finally see this building 7 coming down on the screen in front of them, we can reach hundreds and hundreds of structural engineers and architects at these conventions. We can engage maybe 20% of them. A lot of them continue to walk by. They cannot, but all of those who stop and actually engage with us, almost all of them end up agreeing that, hey, of course, that's a controlled demolition. We asked them, is this a controlled demolition or is this destruction by fire? That's our poll. And we get them to sign our petition and sponsor our resolution, which we want all AIA members to sponsor, by the way. We are calling upon the AIA to call for a new resolution, a new investigation. And we have 100 AIA members already. We're trying to get 200 or 300. So if you're in the AIA and you haven't sponsored our resolution, which all we need is your AIA number to do that, actually. But I fear that I may have misplaced the question there as I diverted Andy.
Sure. It was about why did the organizations, these professional organizations, not stand by the evidence or support us in what we're doing?
Think about the management structure of the American Institute of Architects, which is responsible for 80,000 architects, many of whom work for the richest people in the world developing these buildings. They are in a very tough position. We do go to the conventions. We do speak on the floor. Last year at the annual business meeting, we did make our case in the 10 minutes that we had to give you the evidence, some of which, much more of which you've heard today. And we did hear back from the board members who did not want to acknowledge the reality of what we were bringing to their attention. It would mean that they, as an organization who officially approved the NIST report of how this building 7 came down, they would have to admit they were wrong, that they never really looked at it, that they bought hook, line, and sinker the official story from NIST. And who knows what level of awareness they actually had. We just don't speculate on that about the evidence and the truth of what really brought this building down. We also so there's multiple levels of things going on here, and the board in this case in Atlanta actually lied. They said that this effort would force an extraordinary expensive cost on the AIA, which is not true. It's just a position statement we're asking them to make. They actually said that diesel fuel brought the building down, and which is not true because not even NIST says that. There was no fires on floor 5 where all the diesel is kept. etc. We've got a huge task in educating the AIA, but we do have hundreds of AIA members. We do have a dozen fellows of the American Institute of Architects. So it's a slow build. And when they come into contact with it, they end up signing our petition, most of them. It's the people, the architects and engineers who don't know about the evidence, who have, like me 10 years ago, swallowed the official story. Those are the people who say, oh, this is just conspiracy theory. And when they actually look at it, everything changes. Andy?
We're getting a lot of really good questions here, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I possibly can. But this is one that's being asked a lot, so I'm going to use this one to represent those many. What happened to the study on the collapse of Building 7 being done by the University of Anchorage, Alaska?
Yes, we're working hard on this. We have employed Leroy Halsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, at University of Alaska to study this building and how it came down in a very comprehensive computerized dynamic analysis. And he is 6 months into a 2-year project. And it is a $215,000 effort that we are making. And so we definitely want you to support this project, particularly architects and engineers, with your financial support. We have a $12,000 per month payment, and we've got to have the support of all of us in order to really pull this off. And it's only another 18 months, and so we're asking people to sign on at WTC7evaluation.org, WTC7evaluation.org, and sign up for a $7 or $10 or $25 per month, whatever you can afford, a small piece of the pie, so that all of us working together can make this happen, because it is likely to reverberate, very likely, as he produces his peer-reviewed paper in 18 months, to change the professional academic community's perception, first of all, awareness of Building 7, and then we think it'll just turn the industry upside down when this comes out. It's just such a professional study, and it'll completely disprove that fires could have brought this building down and show what could have brought it down.
Okay. I have some questions on the dust of the World Trade Center. One was about Dr. Millett's study of the dust and his conclusions that he didn't find any nanothermite. I guess Chris Moore did one as well, according to this questioner. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, we'll get into nanothermite very particularly in week 4, and I'd love to take on those questions then. But there was a deep study, a very detailed study done by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen with 8 international scientists. It was peer-reviewed. It was published. It did show that there's particles of the super thermite called nanothermite, which is a highly engineered explosive, or engineered incendiary to become more explosive. And this has been, challenged. People say, oh, this is paint, etc. But they don't prove it. They don't produce their own peer-reviewed papers. No peer-reviewed paper has been produced challenging the results of this study. So we can talk more about that in week 4.
Okay. I have one here from Jeff from Texas. He says, I feel AE911Truth has prepared a format palatable to most reasonable people, moderately educated at the least. How can we draw into this truth drive Americans who are convinced the mainstream media, essentially, channels are providing the end-all be-all news?
Yeah, and it is all about publicity and then encouraging people to act. We act at a national level. We have national projects. Our big advertising campaign with billboards and videos is one example of that. We also have a national effort to reach out to every elected representative, etc. But what is forming now are truth action project, the Truth Action Project, is forming, and it is signing up local action groups all across the country, hundreds of them, and they'll be forming, and you can start or join one of those and do actions locally. Your local elected representatives, local media, local citizens. You can put a table out like we do every month on the 11th of every month, and educate people. Say it's 9/11 Awareness Day, and you tell them about Building 7, and you give them a brochure. And by the way, those brochures are you can download them from our website in the store, or you can buy them already printed. There's all kinds of materials, T-shirts and hats that you can wear to promote people asking you, what's this about Building 7? What's this about 9/11? All kinds of things have to be done at the local level. This is 9/11 awareness across the spectrum of public consciousness. It can be analogous to filling up a swimming pool. It's a slow process, and you can't from minute to minute see any progress. And in our case, we're seeing progress year to year, but not really month to month on average. So it takes massive public awareness, and that takes action at the grassroots level. And that's why we encourage you all to act locally and to gather and form, organize locally in every neighborhood. Well, not neighborhood, but every city. Andy?
Okay, and I just want to add to that too. Anybody who wants to volunteer with AE911Truth, you just go right to the volunteer tab on this website, and we'll get you signed up with a project. It's a bunch of small things done well every day that is going to help win the information war that's taking place with this. And we have many projects that you can help out in that effort. I got a question here. Why were the insurance companies that paid out billions of dollars in providing insurance payouts of the World Trade Center buildings, or why didn't they demand a thorough investigation of what actually brought down World Trade Center 7 specifically, and try not to perhaps pay out in the first place if criminality were part of the equation?
Well, if these insurance companies were involved as part of the process, and we don't know that, but there's been researchers who have exposed that. For instance, Swiss Re, one of the main insurers, was found to be highly involved in the put options, where millions were made betting that the airliner values in their stock market would go down the day of 9/11. This is quite a famous occurrence, which the 9/11 Commission conveniently stopped looking into when they found that these put options were not placed or benefited by Al-Qaeda. So they said, well, since Al-Qaeda wasn't involved, we don't have to research any further. Wow. Well, it does. Those researchers find that goes to the former CIA boss at the Deutsche Bank, Buzzy Krongard. But anyway, we don't look into that, but others have, and you should. Also, the insurance companies raise their premiums hundreds of percents, in some cases 1,000%, and have a whole new terrorism insurance, which the Twin Towers were one of the first examples of. So they benefited enormously financially. And I don't know the calculations, but let's presume that when all the financial dealings are done, they came out on top, and they have no reason to be challenging these. Actually, the insurance companies are among the many industries, including the bankers, with whom they're quite intermixed, according to those who research these things, and benefited enormously from 9/11.
All right, thank you. I have another question. If NIST, if, as NIST claims, there was an interior collapse of World Trade Center 7 before the external collapse, why is there no audio evidence of this internal collapse?
Well, there's actually quite a bit of audio evidence. I played for you the first of all, is a complex question. Setting the internal collapse aside, there's plenty of evidence of explosions. David Chandler has done an excellent analysis of the audio tape from that day, one of them, in which he shows clearly that there's evidence of explosions on the audio of the collapse of Building 7. Others, like I showed you today, heard many explosions. Regarding the internal collapse, which is said to have occurred 10 to 20 seconds prior to the overall collapse of this building, I think that's an excellent point, because Kevin McPadden's, for instance, his eyewitness experience of the explosions occurred just before the building came down, as did others. So one would expect a massive amount of witnesses hearing an internal collapse 10 to 20 seconds prior to the overall collapse, and we don't hear that. Also, if there was an internal collapse in this building in that time, you would have seen massive deformation in the exterior perimeter steel structure, massive breaking of granite panels and windows while that was going on, because guess what? The interior framing of this building is tied to the exterior framing, and so we would have seen that, but we don't at all, actually. So that proves itself that this building was a 7.5 second controlled demolition beginning to end.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here today, and I want to just encourage everybody to come back on Thursday and keep on coming back to these webinars. And for the questions we couldn't get to today, we can get to them at another date. But this is a good one to end it on. It says, why doesn't AE911Truth start their own independent investigation into 9/11, considering the United States government never will? Do you want to address that?
Well, we hope the United States government will be forced by a growing awareness of citizens who are taking their country into their own hands and demanding a real investigation and real justice for the victims of 9/11. We hope that massive public awareness and outcry will happen. I don't know why it's taking 10 years. I can't answer that question. Seems like a long time to me. AE911Truth has done our own investigation. We have produced the results. We have put it out in our 3 or 4 DVDs on the subject, our 50-page booklet. We are also doing our own investigation and computer analysis of Building 7, as I mentioned, from the University of Alaska. And when that's done, we have everything we need to prove, and even before that's done, that Building 7 was an explosive demolition. What we don't have is the legal authority to subpoena witnesses. What we don't have is the stage which will force and compel international bodies to respond and comply to truth and to reality. We are up against a giant machine. We are pushing a very large rock up a very big hill, and we don't know how long it will take to achieve massive public awareness. We don't know when critical mass will be achieved. We don't know when the 100th monkey will learn what he needs to learn in order to then, by influencing the subconscious of other Americans, that it just becomes part of the lexicon of our culture, that 9/11, we were lied to about 9/11, and we've got to do something about it. I guess we're building toward that. And I'm asking every one of you to do something to help us in that effort. There's so much you can do. And just sitting on your computer, sending the AE911Truth.org link or the link to one of our videos to everybody you know can help. And next week, we'll give you even more information as we delve into FEMA and NIST reports, what the American Society of Civil Engineers was up to, the computer simulation. That was the giant fraud that was actually hidden from most architects and engineers and foisted upon others who were listening. The analysis of these few small scattered fires that are for the first time in history, bringing it down a 47-story skyscraper, any skyscraper. We'll be listening to the structural engineers. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank everybody and Andy and questions. And we'll catch up with you this coming Thursday at 1 for the next webinar, week 2. Thanks, everybody.
And
thanks, Andy.
And that's 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern time, same place.
Yes, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And feel free to write to us and submit more questions. We'll try to get them answered. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.